This spring, as the contending teams of the National Hockey League struggle toward the Stanley Cup, a former NHL player is going through a very different kind of ordeal. 15 years ago, Brian Spencer was a hard-hitting forward with the Toronto Maple Leafs. Today, in Florida, he stands charged with the crime of murder.
The young man from the North Woods of British Columbia fought hard to make it to the big leagues. He played with 4 professional teams. When his playing career ended, Brian Spencer faded from the spotlight. 5 years ago, he allegedly shot and killed a man in an argument about the prostitute Spencer was living with. His trial will begin in 2 weeks. The Journal's Alan Abel met Brian Spencer and prepared this report on the man the fans called Spinner.
An abandoned house trailer in the swampland of South Florida. The edge of a murky, stagnant pond with the Everglades closing in. Inside, the vandalized remnants of one man's dream. This is the last known address of a hockey player, a big league hockey player named Brian Spencer. Spinner Spencer, they called him. He was a whirling, swirling roustabout who played for 4 National Hockey League teams. Brian Spencer lived the high life for a while. He got to play hockey with his boyhood idols, men like Dave Keon. But when the dream ended, as it ends for all athletes, he moved to Florida, worked as a mechanic, tried to adjust to a new life without applause and autographs. Brian Spencer doesn't live here anymore. He spent the last 3 months in the Palm Beach County Jail, charged with first-degree murder. It's a charge he denies. In the state of Florida, it's a charge that carries the death penalty. We don't expect our sporting heroes to end up like this, alone, unemployed, living in an abandoned trailer on the edge of the woods with a stagnant pond for a bathtub. It makes you wonder, how could this have happened to that proud, confident young man from Fort St. James, that kid who was willing to fight to get where he wanted? If there is an explanation, maybe it's that everything in Brian Spencer's life prepared him to be a professional hockey player, but nothing prepared him not to be. Tell me about what happens to an athlete when the cheering stops.
One of the things, it's a real important concept. I've thought about it over the years since I got out of hockey. My pride swallowed hard and came to Florida to not have the world say, well, what are you doing now? Because there's quite a drop-off and a lot of people don't, or they're not able to handle it.
For Brian Spencer, leaving hockey was a second major transition. The first had come when he burst into the league from an old fur trading post halfway between the Rockies and the ocean called Fort St. James. The most improbable part of the story may be that Spencer made it out of the fort at all. As a boy, his best friend was Murray Hill, who never left.
It was just hard to believe that somebody was going to get out of the fort. And it was a good feeling. Good for him, good for the town. I think he did more than anybody else in the fort ever hoped to do.
His hope was simple, to play the game. His first line mate was his twin brother, Byron.
Dad built us a little skating rink, and we used to shovel the snow off of it. Dad's dedication, you know, was tremendous. You know, we'd be the only 2 people at a hockey practice sometimes at 4 o'clock on a Saturday morning after driving, 40 miles in 30 below weather in snowy roads. And that was everything to him. It was his whole life.
Through the juvenile leagues, moving from team to team, Brian Spencer climbed the ladder of challenge and combat. He was a big, tough kid from the upcountry who sometimes had to fight to survive.
People made it like that, actually, for Brian. They seemed to want to test him all the time, to test him, you know. We were taught to give respect and to demand respect. And that was very important in our lives.
At the age of 20, Brian made it. He was already married with a baby daughter, and now a Maple Leaf rookie, a face on a bubblegum card. Jim McKenney, a young defenseman, was his closest friend on the team.
He seemed to be a lot more naive than other kids. a lot of other guys had come from big cities. They'd played with junior A teams in the East and been to big cities before. Brian had never gone that route. Once he came here and started to get all the attention from the media and from the fans, he just reveled in it.
I was a young man. I just fresh out of British Columbia, and when I skated out on Maple Leaf Gardens, the people were on their feet.
Another man shared the triumph. Back in the fort, Roy Spencer's dream had come true too. All those mornings on the backyard rink had paid off for both of them. He cabled Brian, "Give him hell, son." December 12, 1970, the Leafs are playing Chicago. Brian Spencer's first nationally televised match, Roy Spencer's hour of triumph.
He prepared himself almost like he was playing the game himself. He ate a steak before the game, and I really believe that he was playing that game with Brian that night.
But the night takes a tragic twist. This CBC station at Prince George is broadcasting the Vancouver Canucks game, not Spencer's Leafs. Enraged and confused, feeling betrayed, Roy Spencer grabs a rifle and drives 100 miles to the transmitter site. He barges through the control room and threatens the staff, demanding that the Vancouver game be taken off the air. To appease him, the station's monitors are switched off. But moments later, when he steps outside, the mounted police are waiting. Roy Spencer shoots an officer in the foot and is killed in the return of fire. Brian Spencer writes the eulogy.
I still remember what he told me. He says, "Give it hell, son, and I'm mighty proud of you." I still remember that.
In 1972, Spencer was released to the then lowly New York Islanders. With his first marriage already over, now he was a small-town boy on the loose in the Big Apple.
Almost like a Crocodile Dundee. If anybody has seen the movie Crocodile Dundee, they have seen Brian Spencer.
An Islander secretary was charmed by the unpolished newcomer. She became his second wife, Janet.
I'll see you later when I get dressed. That's it. Stop it. That's it. I'm not going to do my night channel.
Away from the arena, it was a happy, tranquil time.
This is your first Easter. Happy Easter.
On Long Island, then after a trade to the Buffalo Sabres, Brian and Janet Spencer lived the big league life. With two young sons, the dream seemed complete. But on the ice, the testing never stopped.
There's a fight at the blue line of Buffalo. Tremblay and Brian Spencer butting heads at the moment. Now, Tremblay got it.
I would see him get in a fight, and I would see blood, and I would hear fans around me, encouraging a fight, and I'd want to stand up and say, "That's my husband. I love him. I don't want him to get hurt." I would want the fight to stop.
I can't say I had an overabundance of talent, but I certainly had a lot of tenacity and fortitude, and a lot of ambition, and I think it kept me going a long time.
Brian Spencer had a good career for a player of limited skill. In 1975, he nearly made it to the mountaintop, playing for the Sabres in the Stanley Cup final. Buffalo didn't win the cup that spring. Brian Spencer never won it. Soon he was dealt away to Pittsburgh, then demoted to the minors, and then, at age 30, the kid who beat the odds to get where he wanted wasn't wanted anymore. Once he could return to Fort St. James as a hero, but now no longer a big leaguer, he just drifted away.
Brian was a little disappointed in how things turned out. If anything, he should have been proud. But Brian, he wanted to be like a Jacques Plante or a Dave Keon, people of that nature. And myself, I tried to explain to Brian that all he had to be is himself, and that we were all proud of him. He had succeeded in something that many fail.
If Spencer couldn't be a Dave Keon on the ice, now he found he couldn't match Keon off the ice either.
For some people, they've really enjoyed that adulation, and to a certain degree, miss it when it's not there. And for others, they have learned to put it in its proper perspective and know it's just there for a certain period of time.
While Keon was setting up a real estate business in West Palm Beach, Spencer was just a few blocks away, working on heavy equipment with men like Dan Martinetti.
I used to live in Pittsburgh, and he played hockey in Pittsburgh. I couldn't believe it. I walked down the hallway up in front office, and there he was in there filling out application. I said, "Wow, what are you doing here?" You know? He said, "I'm applying for a job." I said, "Well," I asked him why he quit hockey. He said he got tired of it.
This is where the good life ran out. The trailer in the Everglades, a roster of rusting vehicles to tinker with. By 1982, the time of the murder he's charged with, Spencer had left Janet and the boys in New York and was living here. He was drinking and lost his job. Far from the glitter of the big leagues, this was his world now. Reflections of what he was and what others wanted him to be. Last Friday, after 3 months in jail, Spencer was brought to court in an attempt to win bail and at least temporary freedom. In the hearing room at the opposite corner of the continent from Fort St. James, his family and other allies closed ranks around him. In the wooden pews were his sons, Jason and Jared, his estranged wife, Janet, his twin brother, Byron, his mother. The prosecution charged that Brian Spencer shot a man named Michael Dalfo 2 times in the head and left him to die on a country road. They alleged that Dalfo had argued with a prostitute Spencer was living with at the time.
Mr. Dalfo's body was found.
The defense countered with character witnesses, people who affirmed that Brian Spencer just isn't the sort of man who could kill.
Do you know Brian Spencer?
Yes, I do.
Do you see him in the courtroom?
Yes, I do.
Would you please point him out for the record, please?
When the real trial begins, it may come down to Spencer's word against that of his former girlfriend. Now an old workmate offers a promise of a job and a return to a stable routine,
Danny Thomas Martinetti.
while an old teammate offers a link with happier times.
All right, I'm going to try to set some bail on it.
Spencer's attorneys carry this day. Bail will be granted. That's rare in a first-degree murder case.
I'll set your bond at $50,000, surety or debt.
For the first time in months, Brian Spencer has reason to celebrate. He's free for now. But he and his family still face a trial by jury. A jury that will determine whether Brian Spencer faces a sentence of death, or a life in prison, or a life outside it. For the Journal, I'm Alan Abel in West Palm Beach.